Hello everyone. Today we will discuss about the nervous system. The objectives are to learn about cellular architecture of nervous system, the classification of neurons, the division of nervous system, the components of central nervous system and peripheral nervous system, the clinical aspects. The nervous system is a chief controlling and coordinating system of the body. It is responsible for judgment, intelligence and memory. The sensory part collects the information from the surroundings and help in gaining knowledge and experience, whereas the motor part is responsible for responses of the body. So, the nervous tissue is having the nerve cell or the neurons and the neuroglial cells, which are the supportive cells. The neuron is having the cell body, the dendrite and the axon. The cell body, it is forming the grey matter and the nuclei in the central nervous system and ganglia in the peripheral nervous system. The cell processes are of two types. One is the dendrites, which are more in number and they are short and branched. The axon is a single elongated process and forms the tract or the white matter in the central nervous system and nerves in the peripheral nervous system. And the collaterals arise at right angles. So, the classification of the neurons are classified depending upon various factors. So, depending upon the number of processes, they are divided into four types: the unipolar, bipolar, pseudo-unipolar and the multipolar. The unipolar neurons are the mesencephalic nucleus of the trigeminal nerve, and also it occurs during fetal life. It is more common in the lower vertebrates. The bipolar neurons are confined to the first neuron of retina, ganglia of 8th cranial nerve and the olfactory mucosa. The pseudo-unipolar neurons, they are actually unipolar to begin but functionally becomes bipolar, and they are found in dorsal nerve root ganglia, the sensory ganglion of the cranial nerves. The multipolar neurons, so most of the neurons in man are multipolars. So, example is all the motor neurons and also internuncial neurons. According to length of the axon, the neurons can be divided into Golgi type 1, Golgi type 2 and the omicron neurons. The Golgi type 1 is having long axons and short dendrites. So, seen in the pyramidal cells of the cortex, Purkinje cells of the cerebellum and the anterior horn cells of the spinal cord. Golgi type 2 neurons, these are neurons with short axons and they establish synapse with the neighboring neurons. These are seen in the cerebral and cerebellar cortices. The omicron neurons they are having without axons, they are having only the dendrite and they are seen in retina of the eyeball. So, functionally the neurons are classified as the sensory neurons, the motor neurons and the autonomic neurons. The sensory neurons, it may be primary, secondary or tertiary. The primary neurons are situated in the dorsal root ganglia of spinal nerves. The secondary neurons seen in the grey matter of the spinal cord and the brain, and the tertiary is situated in the thalamus. So, the motor neurons, they are divided into upper motor neurons and the lower motor neurons. The upper motor neurons are present in the motor area of the brain, whereas the lower motor neurons are present in the cranial nerve nuclei and the anterior horn of the spinal cord. So, the autonomic neurons are divided into parasympathetic and sympathetic. So, the parasympathetic is divided into preganglionic neurons and the postganglionic neurons. The preganglionic neurons are present in the cranial nerve nucleus 3, 5, 7, 9 and 10th cranial nerves. The postganglionic neurons are situated close to the wall of the viscera. Sympathetic is also having the preganglionic neurons and the postganglionic neurons. The preganglionic neurons are present in the lateral horn of the T1 segment and to the lumbar segments, that is T1 to L2. The postganglionic neurons are present as a ganglia away from the viscera. So, depending upon the shape, the neurons are classified as stellate neurons, the basket cells, the fusiform and the pyramidal cells. And according to the size, they are classified as macroneuron having 7 micrometer. Example for this is Betz cells. The microneuron, it is less than 7 micrometer and example is granular cells. Synapse, it is the site of contact between the nerve cells. So, the synapse may be between the axon and the dendrite, forming the axodendritic synapse, or between the axon and the cell body, that is axosomatic synapse, or between the axon and axon, that is axonic synapse. The neuroglial cells, these are the supporting cells. They support, protect, connect and remove the debris from the nervous system. They includes the astrocyte, oligodendrocyte, the ependymal cells and the microglia. The astrocytes are star-shaped cells and they supply the nutrition of the nervous tissue. It forms the blood-brain barrier. There are two types of astrocytes, one is protoplasmic and another one is the fibrous variety. The oligodendrocytes, this is the counterpart of the Schwann cells and it myelinates the tracts. Ependymal cells, these are columnar cells. It lines the cavities of central nervous system and it secretes cerebrospinal fluid. The neuroglial cells in the CNS is another is microglia, which act as a macrophages of the central nervous system. So, the neuroglial cells in the peripheral nervous system includes Schwann cells that surrounds and forms the myelin sheaths around the larger nerve fibers of the peripheral nervous system. It is vital to regeneration of the peripheral nerve fibers. Another type of cells is the satellite cells. It surrounds the neuron cell bodies within the ganglia. The reflex arc. A reflex arc is the functional unit of the nervous system. So, in its the monosynaptic reflex arc consists of the receptor, the sensory neuron, interneuron, the motor neuron and the effector. So, here we can see the receptor in the skin. So, sensation is carried through the sensory neuron and the motor neurons brings the contraction of the effector, that is the muscles present in the arm. Divisions of the nervous system. The anatomical division, it is divided as the central nervous system and the peripheral nervous system. So, the nervous system divided into central nervous system and the peripheral nervous system. The central nervous system again includes the brain and the spinal cord. The peripheral nervous system includes 12 pairs of cranial nerves and the 31 pairs of the spinal nerves. Functional division The peripheral nervous system is divided into the afferent and the efferent system. Then efferent, again it is divided into somatic nervous system and the autonomic nervous system. The somatic nervous system includes the 12 cranial nerves and 31 pairs of the spinal nerves, whereas the autonomic nervous system includes sympathetic and parasympathetic system. So, the central nervous system is concerned with perception and integration of sensory information. It helps in initiation and coordination of motor activities, and the motor activities are actually the sense originated, sense guided and sense controlled. So, the central nervous system includes the brain and the spinal cord. So, the grey and white matter of the brain, the grey matter is made up of the cell bodies, the dendrites, the connective tissue and the blood vessels, and the white matter is made up of the myelinated axons, the neuroglial cells, oligodendrocytes, the blood vessels. So, the brain is divided into 3 different parts. That includes forebrain or the prosencephalon, midbrain or the mesencephalon and the hindbrain or the rhombencephalon. Again, the forebrain is divided into the telencephalon and the diencephalon. The telencephalon is made up of 2 cerebral hemispheres and the median part in front of the interventricular foramen. The diencephalon or thalamencephalon it is hidden by the cerebrum. It consists of thalamus, hypothalamus, metathalamus, which includes the medial and lateral geniculate bodies. The epithalamus includes the penile body, the habenular trigone and the posterior commissure, and the subthalamus. The midbrain or the mesencephalon, it includes the crus cerebri, substantia nigra and the tectum and the tegmentum. The hindbrain or the rhombencephalon consists of metencephalon and the myelencephalon. The metencephalon is made up of pons and cerebellum. The myelencephalon includes the medulla oblongata. So, here we can make out the forebrain including the cerebrum, thalamus, the hypothalamus, the midbrain, the hindbrain including pons, medulla oblongata and the cerebellum. The peripheral nervous system, it includes somatic nervous system and the autonomic nervous system. The somatic nervous system deals with changes in the external environment, that is exteroceptive or proprioceptive. It includes 12 pairs of cranial nerves and 31 pairs of the spinal nerves. So, in the typical spinal reflex or the movements of the somatic nervous system, it includes a sensory neuron in a dorsal root ganglion of the spinal nerve, the connector or the interneuron in the posterior gray column of the spinal cord, and an effector or the motor neuron in the anterior gray column, the axon of which reaches the target cells of striated or voluntary muscles. So, the somatic nervous system is having the afferent compounds and the efferent compounds. The afferent compounds includes the general exteroceptive conveying pain, temperature and touch from the skin, the special exteroceptive for vision and hearing, the general proprioceptive from muscles, bones and joints of the head and neck, body wall and extremities, and the special proprioceptive from vestibular receptors for balancing. So, the somatic motor nerves may be classified into the efferent components, may be having the general somatic efferents which supply the muscles developed from the embryonic somites, and the special visceral efferents that supply the muscles of head and neck derived from the bronchial arches. So, for voluntary movements, the two sets of neurons are involved, the upper motor neurons and lower motor neurons. So, the difference between them are as follows. The cell body of the upper motor neurons is seen in the grey matter of motor areas of cerebral cortex, the nuclei of basal ganglia and the brainstem, whereas the lower motor neuron cell bodies are present in the grey matter of brainstem and the anterior grey column of the spinal cord. The axons of the upper motor neurons are present in the cerebrum, brainstem and the white matter of spinal cord. The lower motor neurons axons are present striated muscles directly and the extrafugal and the intrafugal fibers. The functions of the upper motor neurons is to regulate the movements and it is not concerned with the muscles, whereas the lower motor neurons activate the group of muscles without knowing the motives of contraction. So, the autonomic nervous system deals with the changes with the internal environment, that is interoceptive or visceroceptive. It gives response by reflex activities and it is expressed by regulation of body temperature, blood pressure, cardiorespiratory rate, gastrointestinal motility and the glandular secretion. So, the autonomic nervous system possesses the sensory components and the motor components. The sensory components includes general visceral afferent, example hunger, thirst and nausea. The special visceral afferent, the smell and taste. The sensations for normal visceral reflexes, example the carotid sinus Ehring-Breuer's reflex, and the visceral pain sensations. So, the sensations of the autonomic nervous systems are conveyed to the central nervous system by both viscerosensory and somatosensory fibers. The motor components includes the preganglionic and the postganglionic neurons. The effector or the target cells supplied by the postganglionic motor neurons are of three types, that is cardiac muscle, smooth muscle and the glandular cells. So, the autonomic nervous system presents two subdivisions, the sympathetic and parasympathetic. So, here we can see the actions of the sympathetic and parasympathetic system. The sympathetic system, the preganglionic neurons are located in the lateral horn of all the T segments and the L2 and L3 segments. So, it is also known as thoracolumbar outflow. The parasympathetic system, the preganglionic neurons are located partly in the brainstem and partly in the cranial nerve, the 3rd, 7th, 9th and 10th, and also the S2, S3 and S4 segments. They are also known as the craniosacral outflow. The clinical aspect, if a nerve is injured or cut, a series of degenerative and then regenerative changes follows. The leprosy bacillus attacks the nerve by entering through the skin and travels proximally within the endoneurium, damaging the Schwann cells. In this pathway, motor and sensory fibers degenerate when the bacilli invade the neighboring endoneural tubes. Most of the brain tumors are neuroglial in origin and most common one is the astrocytoma. So, now the questions for assignment: cellular structure of neuron, classification of neurons, neuroglial cells, the components of peripheral nervous system, the difference between upper motor neurons and the lower motor neurons. Thank you.